We've looked at a number of simple situations for how to use these lookup functions, and I've provided some generic guidance on when to use each of them. Now we're going to bring all of our lookup functions together to identify some of the best ways to use them, some of the common pitfalls, and prepare you for exercise 2. While we have 4 functions in total, we can generally separate them into the index match and directional lookup categories. The index match functions are generally superior to the directional lookups. However, that does not mean that they are always going to be your go-to option. The index match function really gains computational superiority when your HLOOKUP or VLOOKUP table arrays are very wide and you're only pulling a singular column or row. For example, the table shown here contains a list of client code numbers along the left and then many details to the right, such as name, address, contract date, main contact, and more. Imagine that we need to pull the main contact from this table. It is the 7th column in our array. A VLOOKUP on this table encompasses the client code in addition to all 6 fields, only one of which we're actually interested in. Excel's calculation efficiency can be maximized by limiting the number of potential changed nodes. So let's visualize a quick dependency tree. Somewhere there are going to be values that feed into this table, represented by the green arrows. When one of the green arrows changes, or Excel thinks one of them has changed, then Excel will update its calculation to indicate that any formula affected by that change needs to be recalculated. Using a VLOOKUP, a change to any of the 6 green arrows would trigger our function to recalculate. Imagine if our array referenced 20 columns. Now we're talking about 20 green arrows where any single change causes the whole thing to recalculate. Say that the 3rd green arrow has a change somewhere in its tree. That arrow impacts the client addresses, which has absolutely 0 impact on our lookup for the main contact name. Since the VLOOKUP does not know that, it does not care either. That green arrow change will trigger our VLOOKUP function to recalculate, and since Excel thinks this value will have changed, any functions downwind of our VLOOKUP will also have to recalculate. This can take a function that should only calculate, say, 5% of the time and easily make it calculate 40% or more, which leads to other functions that should have only calculated 5% of the time, calculating the same 40% or more, massively eating up your resources and slowing down your workbook. As you can imagine, with a large workbook, these calculation times can snowball, resulting in long wait times for calculations. I've seen workbooks that take as long as 2 or 3 minutes or more to calculate completely. What happens, though, when the VLOOKUP is replaced with index and match? The internal arrows all vanish since these ranges are no longer a part of our formula. By minimizing our footmark, we dramatically reduce the probability that our function needs to recalculate. Going a step further, we could actually separate our index and match functions to achieve further calculation efficiency if desired. If we segregate the functions to individual cells, there is a lower probability that only the index function has to recalculate due to a change in the final result, and the same level of probability that both functions recalculate. Imagine this shifts one of our dependency arrows to red. If the red arrow changes, only half of our lookup process has to recalculate. If the green arrow changes, then the entire lookup recalculates. This separation can be particularly useful if you have many lookups referencing the same match column but using different columns to index into. Understanding the efficiency of the functions and balancing that against the knowledge level of the people using the workbook is up to your own judgment. The VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP functions are much more commonly used and known, however there is the trade-off with efficiency. Sometimes there is going to be no realistic efficiency difference between the two approaches, such as for simple lists. Consider here, I have a list of states and their abbreviations. If I know that this list will never have a column inserted between my states and abbreviation, the VLOOKUP function is just as effective as the index match while being friendlier to other users. With that behind us, what are some of the common problems that people encounter with these functions? For the VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP functions, the problem I see most frequently is the issue of searching left to right and top to bottom. Consider this version of our client listing. In this version, I've duplicated many of the fields to the right of the main contact. How many times have you seen a workbook like this and why? I see workbooks like this nearly every day of the week. There's even a long period of time where I was the culprit behind the madness. When a workbook is designed like this, it means that the user is relying entirely upon VLOOKUP or HLOOKUP functions and is duplicating data to the right of the field that they want to search on. I have this workbook with the duplicate fields and another without them. If I look at their size in Windows Explorer, we can see the immediate impact on the file size. This is a small data file. Initially, it's only 20 kilobytes. but the duplication results in an almost 50% increase in file size up to 30 kilobytes. While storage is cheap, bigger files take longer to load, have more contact points for errors, and are more challenging to audit. One of the great advantages of the index-match combination is the elimination of this duplication. The index and match functions don't care what order your data is in, so we can do searches on the primary contact name without ever needing to duplicate the values to the right. I almost always defer to using the index-match combination unless I absolutely know that I will have users that will need to modify the formulas and are unfamiliar with that combination. That being said, the following exercise will take you across a wide variety of mixing and matching all of these functions to lay information out across a sales report. The report will use this client list without the duplications, a referrals table, a line item table, and a products table. The sales report should have formulas placed into every highlighted cell using either an index-match combination, a VLOOKUP, or some other combination of functions. Due to the nature of this exercise, you'll need an additional function that we have not yet covered, but you should be familiar with, the if-error function. You can use the if-error to produce a blank result if your match or lookup functions return an error themselves because an item may not exist. There is an example of how to use the if-error function within the exercise workbook to the right of the table, as shown here. As you can see, there are quite a few cells to fill with formulas. I've included some support cells to the upper right side of the table that you can place intermediary calculations into as well, which I highly recommend. You could completely fill out this workbook with index match functions, however I do ask that you try to use the VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP functions to become acquainted with them as well. One trick that you'll need is for the line item lookups. The line item lookup will need to refer to a combination of the client code and the line item. On the line item tab, you can see that I have already produced a combined field for you that concatenates the client code and the line number. You'll want to do your matching for the line item on this column, and that will require a little bit of thought as to how to construct your formula. This is a fairly common tactic for performing lookups across multiple different fields in order to find a unique set of values. While this might seem daunting, you have all of the tools necessary to complete this exercise. Once you do complete the exercise, try selecting different client code values from the drop-down in cell D2. This will show you how your formulas update. There will be a solution workbook provided to you that includes a number of hard-coded versions of a dozen or so different client codes to see how your results stack up, plus a master report with all of the formulas that I used personally. Good luck, and I'll see you in our next chapter on named ranges.